Allan Usher, the Ombudsman, had to go, I suppose, but it suited the government because he was a pest. He was giving them a hard time on detention centres. That's essentially the bottom line?
Well, it's certainly the case that he hadn't made himself popular with the government. He'd taken up the detention centre issues. He'd been very vigorous in that, and we now know a paper trail of exchanges between his office and Chris Bowen's office over a long period of time, and the government felt that he was overstepping the mark on a number of those things, or being rather too vigorous. So when he was caught in this particular situation where he had briefed Sarah Hanson-Young to ask him questions, he found he had no friends really on either side.
And the Greens certainly took it pretty hard. Here's Bob Brown.
This is a political assassination of a very decent Australian working in the public interest.
Look, I think the questions that I asked were important to be put. I don't regret it, Tony. I was confronted with an option, and I think it's pretty naive to think that politicians aren't confronted with these options on a daily basis. You get information, you make a choice.
But speaking of naive, I think the Greens were a bit naive in how they reacted in the first instance to this. I mean, at the beginning, when these emails first came out, the Greens didn't seem to figure that it was going to be a problem, or certainly not as serious a problem as it was. And in those emails, it wasn't just the scripting of the questions. There was also offers to brief Senator Hanson-Young on legislation that hadn't yet been made public, which, you know, really gives the government a fair bit of room to pressure a public official.
But on this question, though, that Sarah Hanson-Young raised there about collusion and how common is it, you only have to go back to the Godwin-Gretsch situation to know that perhaps that explains why the opposition really didn't put a lot of pressure on the government over this issue all the way along.
Well, that's certainly one reason, but it does happen more often than we would think. I mean, Usher's great crime was that he got caught. But, you know, Bob Brown talks about political assassination. Well, Usher supplied the bullets, Sarah Hanson-Young loaded the weapon, and the government fired it. So they were all complicit in what happened. And I think it was a great shame for Usher, but he began the process, unfortunately, that led to his own demise.
And yet he was clearly doing a lot of good work, as some people saw it, in terms of putting the pressure on the government over detention centres and keeping them honest.
Well, they were definitely out to get him. Otherwise, why did they ask for him to produce all the correspondence between himself and MPs? They must have known he was up to something, and they set out to get him.
But he should have been a bit more careful.